the role of body fat is to be able to fuel your cells with energy between meals. But when the main source of our dietary fat is seed oils that are chemically very different from the fats that we used to eat because their fatty acid makeup is different, they're high in PUFA, and we'll talk about what that is. Our body fat becomes very different than what it used to be. So when I looked at whether or not our high PUFA body fat can still do its job, which is to supply us with energy between meals, I found that disturbingly the answer is quite often no, it cannot do that main job. So mitochondria are the little organelles inside every one of your cells that burn your body fat and convert it to energy. And when your body fat is too full of PUFA, your mitochondria have a problem because too much PUFA can shut down your mitochondria. So I'm going to show you that high PUFA body fat is the best explanation for our modern epidemics of chronic disease and obesity. And I'm going to show you that our high seed oil diet traps us in a tragic, vicious cycle of unhealthy eating, organ damage, metabolic dependence on sugar, and this causes food addictions, the metabolic dependence on sugar, that just demolish our willpower and very often our self-esteem because they make staying away from healthy food impossible. The step one, how you get into the cycle, by eating seed oils. These are seed oils. There's 8 of them. I call them the hateful 8. The top 6 are the kind that you need to look for on labels. The bottom 2, not really used in products you buy in a grocery store, mostly in restaurants. These seed oils, collectively, are what makes junk food junk. They're unhealthy because there are toxins that get generated during refining of these fats. In other words, you can eat soy and corn and sunflower seeds, and that's totally fine. The problem is that the heat and the chemicals and the treatment that happens in the factory to extract the, in some cases, minute amount of oil from the seed, make it profitable, damage the oil and create toxins that don't exist in the seed. This is the last thing seed oil should be used for. This is a deep fryer filled with soy oil. And the restaurant workers who breathe this in are at risk for developing lung cancer from the volatile toxins. And when those volatiles get on your uniform, it forms a varnish that is difficult to wash out and has actually, it's combustible, it has burned down a couple of laundromats. Deep fryers filled with soy oil are toxin-generating machines. And foods cooked in any kind of seed oil this way should have health warnings like cigarettes and alcohol do. Nobody should cook with seed oils because when you do, you create a massive amount of new toxins that you either breathe in or eat or both. But again, none of these are in the seed. And these are very similar to the toxins that develop during the factory. The same processes can occur every time you heat an oil. And so when you deep fry it, you're really heating it. You're heating it up to a couple hundred degrees for an extended time period. So the more heat and the more time, the more toxins. And it's coming from the polyunsaturated part of the fats, of the polyunsaturated types of fatty acids that are in the oils. And the reason that these oils are unhealthy is, and the defining feature of junk food is because they are high in these polyunsaturated fatty acids which deteriorate when you heat with them and when you process them. There is actually an army of scientists who have been trying to mitigate the toxin development during both the refining and the heating. These are the seed oil scientists. They work in the industry and they are constantly looking for ways to make the oil as less toxic as possible. And the answer is because of chemistry. It's just that's just the basic chemistry of the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the very types of fatty acids that the American Heart Association and Harvard tell us to be eating more of because of the processing. There's toxins, as I mentioned. How many? Well, in your average bottle, about 5%. This is from canola oil. This is a study that looked at what happened to canola oil after processing, and this is before being thrown in a deep fat fryer and heated again. And many of the fat-soluble vitamins are lost, 75% of the E vitamins, 80% of the vitamin A, and pretty much 100% of the minerals are stripped out. Dr. Kate, because I only cook with olive oil at home, and I have to tell them that it's not just what you're cooking with. Because these days, manufacturers, we eat a lot of foods that someone else made for us. And these days, while we have lots of other labels, but we do not have one for toxin-free, seed oil-free. But you can be buying foods that you think are healthy, and unless you read the fine print on every label, you won't have a clue that they're loaded with seed oils. And same deal when you go out to eat at pretty much any kind of a chain restaurant, sit-down restaurant, whether it's fast food or not, 99% of the time it's a seed oil. They're not going to be cooking with olive oil, and increasingly they're using butter oil instead of actual butter, which may have zero butter in it or may have a blend with a small portion of butter. Here's an example of like why this is an organic infant formula. The first fat in here is safflower or sunflower oil, and the second one is soybean oil. So these little babies are just getting a ton of seed oils if this is what you're buying for them, thinking it's okay because it's organic. Because they have worked their way so extensively into the food supply, they're now a full 30% of the average person's daily calories. So the average person gets somewhere around 3,600 calories. That translates to 1,200 from seed oils. So there's 4 different types that I'm showing you, and 2 big categories. There's saturated and unsaturated. And where it says low chance over here, that's a low chance of oxygen attacking this thing and starting off a reaction that ends up leading to toxins. When you look at the unsaturated fatty acids, the chances are higher. And that's because oxygen loves to attack double bonds. Oxygen really can't even control itself around 2 double bonds in a row. So where you see 2 double bonds and 3 double bonds, this is I'm sorry, it's cut off, 1 to 10 billion times higher chance of oxygen attacking this particular polyunsaturated fatty acid, which is actually an omega-3 fat. So omega-6 and omega-3 are both problems because of the oxidation. All PUFA is pro-inflammatory when oxygen attacks it. And in the amount that we consume now, we can't control that oxygen attack. And that's a whole different level of problem. And part of the reason it's a massive problem is because once it gets started, once an oxygen finds a way to attack the PUFA, then the polyunsaturated fatty acid itself becomes dangerous. What this is showing is that polyunsaturated fatty acid gets activated into something called a free radical. And a free radical is dangerous in the same way that radiation is dangerous. And it attacks other PUFA molecules so fast it can damage 1 billion other PUFA molecules in 1 second. So it's an extremely destructive kind of a chain reaction that generates all kinds of cellular disorganization and damage. It can polymerize your cell membranes. It can completely disrupt anything in its path. And the only way it will stop is if antioxidants in your body manage to trap this instead. So you have to have boatloads of antioxidants in your body for this to end before you've destroyed billions and billions of your polyunsaturated fatty acids and generated a gazillion, literally, that's the number, to new toxins that weren't there. The toxins come from the fatty acids breaking down and reacting with oxygen. They form, it's not spontaneously, but they react with oxygen and then they develop into toxins. So a functioning part of your cell, a totally healthy normal membrane that contains polyunsaturated fatty acid, can be a cell membrane or it can be a lipoprotein like LDL cholesterol. If it contains too much polyunsaturated fatty acid and oxygen attacks it, you can get this damaging reaction happening. You can get massive amounts of toxin forming and you get polymerization that just destroys everything that the cell is trying to do in that local area. So mitochondria, your mitochondria produce energy, right? So we're talking about, I'm talking about PUFA in the body fat. So I'm talking about PUFA as a fuel, and it's a fuel for your mitochondria. So your mitochondria have to manipulate that PUFA. Basically, they burn it, and they react it with oxygen in order to burn it. They can use different fuels, not just body fat. They can use sugar too. But it is oxygen, and it's not that they use, right? So I just showed you that oxygen and PUFA are a bad combination, especially when you get activated oxygen. And guess what mitochondria use? To break down chemical bonds and generate energy like this for your cell. So fuels come in to a mitochondria and they use activated oxygen to generate ATP, which is a form of cell energy. It's like you've turned that mitochondria into a toxin generating machine, because the same kinds of reactions that can occur in a deep fryer will occur in the mitochondria. The same chemistry applies, and you'll have the same laundry list of many multitudes of toxins forming because of your mitochondria trying to burn polyunsaturated fatty acids. And the word that we use for the kind of hurt is inflammation. It causes inflammation. Inflammation makes your cells sick. And if you've heard of pretty much any kind of disease that is a chronic disease, you will hear the word inflammation. There's a lot of inflammatory diseases out there. The number one source of inflammation in our food supply is the polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's responsible for the vast majority of inflammatory related health problems. You feel it where it comes into your body, which is your digestive system. Once you stop eating seed oils, you stop damaging your intestinal tract, and you discover that a lot of foods you thought you had intolerances to, it was actually because your digestive system was so inflamed it couldn't properly deal with certain foods. But once you stop that inflammation, now you can broaden your diet and enjoy a lot more tasty and delicious and nutritious foods, especially things like dairy and meat. In the same way, you can damage your brain, you can damage your lungs with cigarettes, you can damage your liver with alcohol and other organs. You can also damage your body fat by having too much polyunsaturated fatty acids stored in your body fat, not just by having too much of it. In fact, times were you could be obese and metabolically healthy before seed oils. And when I was a medical student and early in my career, they were still debating whether or not obesity was even a risk factor for mortality. Because a long time ago, you could be overweight and you would not be at increased risk for heart attack or cancer or strokes or other fatal diseases. But now you are. Now we've made obesity a deadly disease by causing body fat failure, and you damage your body fat by eating seed oils. We've radically reconstructed our body thanks to the American Heart Association and Harvard's 70-year experiment on us. They got us convinced that we should avoid saturated fatty acids, and we've been eating more polyunsaturated fatty acids, and it has redesigned our body, but in a horrible way, not in a good way. So now our body fat is about 30% PUFA. Our body fat is an organ of energy storage, and so when we overeat a fatty acid like PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's where they're going to go, right? We'll store anything in excess, but we can't, if we can manipulate certain things to be safe to store. For example, sugar. Like, we don't store sugar in little crystals in our body fat. We actually convert chemically sugar molecules into fatty acid molecules, but we can't change the PUFA. But polyunsaturated fatty acids are a part of a healthy diet. We do need some. We need to have the omega-3 and the omega-6, but not for energy or fuel, for building blocks. We especially need both omega-3 and omega-6 for our nervous system. Of those two types of PUFAs, the vast majority of fats in our brain are those two types of PUFAs, 50%. Half, not the majority. So back in the day, though, we used to get enough from our foods, from natural foods, to get all the building blocks. And how much do we get? Well, 5% was probably enough. What I've done is I've looked at like the historical record and of adipose biopsies and how much, what kind of foods people used to eat. And that's where I came up with these numbers. And if you want a reference for this, it's on my website. It's a PUFA project. We do have a way of protecting polyunsaturated fatty acids from being attacked by oxygen. We actually have antioxidant enzyme systems. It's not like the kind of antioxidants that you buy, like when you hear about blueberries are high in antioxidants. That really has nothing to do with how we protect the PUFA in our bodies once it gets in our bodies. It has a lot to do with when we cook with it and in our digestive systems. They don't function once they get in our body because we have enzymes for that. And the enzymes are super powerful. Once oxygen has activated a PUFA and turned it into a free radical and a cascade is happening, our antioxidants have a way of slipping in there, our systems have a way of slipping in there and protecting the PUFA so that it can actually bring an end to those damaging cascades before they do very much damage. But we have to have because it's so quick, the PUFA cascades are so fast, we have to have a massive amount of these things. And we can actually overwhelm our systems when we have an overwhelming amount of PUFA in our diet. And in fact, if we're constantly asking our bodies, our antioxidant enzyme systems to basically sacrifice themselves to protect the PUFA, we can run out of antioxidants. And that's when we really, really get into trouble. And this is why, it can take a couple of years or decades before the toxicity of PUFA fully manifests. Once our enzyme systems are depleted like this and they can't protect then the PUFA, then we just get toxins starting to form. I'm not going to say spontaneously, but it's kind of spontaneous because there's always oxygen in our tissue, and when it happens to get activated enough, it will generate a toxin, and we just can't stop it. We lack the antioxidant capacity to stop it. And this is really bad. Once you get here, you are prone for you're just a setup for all kinds of inflammatory problems. I'm saying this is how we get disease. this development of toxin from our own tissues, from our own cell membranes. If this happens in a nerve cell, it can kill the nerve cell or cause dysfunction to the nerve cell. You get this happening enough, you get neurological disease. You can get Alzheimer's, you can get Parkinson's. Any kind of degenerative neurologic disease can form because of PUFA overload happening in the central nervous system. The same kind of process can affect your lipoproteins, the cholesterol-carrying particles in your blood. So if you don't have enough antioxidants to protect the fat as it travels through your bloodstream, then the LDL particles become little toxin delivery vehicles, and you get arteriosclerosis, and you can get heart attacks and strokes. It won't explain why some people get, why Alzheimer's runs in some people's families and why, say, lupus or Parkinson runs in other people's families. That's genetic, and that has to do with what tissues your body is less able to, or just has more PUFA exposure or is less able to protect. The PUFA with, has less enzyme systems in those tissues. And when they, so when they start the test and you give it monounsaturated fatty acid, the kind that's in olive oil and the kind that actually our body prefers to store, it actually goes above baseline. Saturated stays right around baseline. On a healthy diet, we have tons of monounsaturated fat in our body fat. But they also tested the two most common types of polyunsaturated fatty acids in our diet, an omega-6 and an omega-3. And as you can see, after just a short amount of time here, during which the antioxidants are getting depleted, right? So I said that our cells have the capacity to prevent oxidation. We have antioxidant enzyme systems, but you can overwhelm those systems. And so when you give pure omega-6 and omega-3, you start to overwhelm those systems in a matter of minutes, and then energy production starts to drop off dramatically. And as you can see, the omega-3 is even a worse fuel for our cells than omega-6. And that's exactly what you would predict from the chemistry, because the omega-3 has, from that slide I showed you earlier, has a larger zone of oxygen attack. And it indeed is a more rapid reaction and a more rapid deterioration into toxins, and more problematic when you force your mitochondria to burn PUFA. It's worse if you force your mitochondria to burn omega-3. And that's, I think, a very important, it's important to highlight right now that they've done a lot of studies on, are there health benefits from adding omega-3 supplementation into your diet? And the answer has been a resounding not always. And that's because it has to do with the fact that you are maybe giving it to somebody who's already reached the PUFA overload threshold, their antioxidants have been depleted and they can't handle anymore. Or you may be giving it to somebody who has a deficiency and you're correcting it and you make everything work better.